we actually just found a kit that was really, really cool. And it just felt really, really bad when this like champion that's so cute and happy keeps slamming you with your own spells.
Oh, so she was literally gonna have Salus's kit.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And we're like, you know what? The kit is fun enough. We should just pivot towards the kit.
Design that fits the kit.
Exactly. And
Need a more edgy, buff, angry dude.
yeah.
More chains.
He can Malphite ult me, but I don't want a bunny girl Malphite ulting me.
Hello and welcome to The Dive, driven by Kia, Season 8, Episode number 20, which, by the way, we have been informed by our producer today. Meteos actually did do a dive episode back in Season 7, so this is your 21st episode of The Dive. Congratulations.
Yay.
We got to correct we have to correct the count.
Yeah. This is going to be a new thing. It's going to be like Season 8, Episode 23, Episode 24 for Meteos.
Yeah.
So hype.
Every single time. We are recording this right after the games on Friday because they were over so fast.
Yeah.
This is one of the fastest days of LCS ever. A mega stomp. But it's been quite an interesting week of LCS. We, of course, did our Thursday, Friday games, which we told everybody about plenty of times, and everybody showed up and nobody complained. It was well done. Congratulations to everybody else as well who tuned in. Definitely a fun one.
Yeah, I mean, it was a very one-sided week. There wasn't really, I guess Energy Immortals was probably the closest series because Immortals kind of looked like they were going to win that one game at one point, but it was 4-2-0s. We've had a lot of one-sided series. I think the biggest surprise was definitely the Fly Dig series, though. I think most people at least that I talked to, thought it was going to be competitive, whether they thought it was going to be one way or the other. Most people were predicting FlyQuest for sure, but I think people thought this is going to be a competitive series. And there was so much hype around it with all the trash talk and the rivalry building. And then FlyQuest just absolutely demolished Dignitas. They super stomped them.
Yeah, I was thinking, I was so excited for today, like all week pretty much. I was thinking, okay, C9 stomping Shopify, that's the appetizer. I'm ready for this Dig series. And then it was over. It was such a stomp. It was when you start a new game and you fight against the final boss right away and he just completely claps you. That's what this was, because I think everyone saw Dig as the protagonist, FlyQuest as the villains, and
today
that playoffs is the end of the game when Dignitas wins.
Yeah, they're going to need some serious redemption arc because that was a bit dirty.
Yeah, I mean, we mentioned it on the previous episode, but leading into this week, the scrims and all the players from all the other teams kind of alluded to this possibility where FlyQuest have been doing really well and Dignitas have been doing the opposite of really well in their scrims and losing a lot. But we still got a whole bunch of mega cool content leading up to this week, and the build-up was definitely more fun than the actual payoff here in the 2-0.
It's the journey, not the destination.
But exactly, that's the key.
The destination sucked ass. The journey, the journey was.
We made friends along the way. We had a really good time. It's quite interesting because this is like our send-off into this long break. So all of these teams that
going on break.
We're
gonna keep having episodes.
Yeah, I mean, the Dive is gonna keep having episodes. You're right.
Dive's working hard.
The Dive is gonna have some weird release dates, by the way. Our next release date is going to be Tuesday, July 2nd. Also, some things to note for this episode. This is going to be a special episode. This is going to be a dev interview.
That's going to be this episode. So if they're watching it, they will know that it's out.
Yes, but we should let them know because it's the beginning of the episode that later in the episode
that this episode will be out if you are watching it.
No, that we're gonna have Riot Lexi on the Dive.
True, yeah.
How is that funny?
I think he meant the July 2nd release date. It's going to be this episode.
It is.
No, that. Okay, yeah.
He just got it.
Well, there's so many notes. There's so many notes we have to read.
Guys, you got to know, this episode, when you are watching it, is out. It is released.
I'm going to take a moment.
The day will be July 2nd that you are watching it.
So
you will be there enjoying it in the future. We are in the past.
Hello, July 2nd.
Yeah,
people.
that's crazy.
Have we solved global warming? Is everyone chilling out there in the future?
No. It's looking grim.
Okay.
Yeah. But no, it's definitely going to be a bit of a break. We have 22 days, I think, until our next games. It's not going to be till July 20th is when we're going to be back. So July 20th is quite a long break.
Right.
So it'll be a lot of time for teams to kind of like to get those scrims going and to see if they can actually make changes. Teams that are struggling, I think it's pretty advantageous to have this time to actually kind of, reset and potentially be able to fix some things, unless your team is just like so mental boom that it just goes even worse. But like there's a few teams that are obviously really struggling. Shopify still hasn't even won, let alone a series. They still haven't even won a game.
They haven't even won a lane, I think. I don't know. It is looking rough.
Yeah, Shopify is looking really doomed. Like this is... I mean, it's only 3 series, but we're doing single round robin. This is the equivalent of starting 0-6, right? And it's just like there hasn't been any bright spot that you could really point to, because the rough thing is it's like in spring, yeah, the team wasn't doing very well, but Boogie was still Bwipo, was popping off. Like Bwipo was playing really, really well, and everyone was looking at him as this top level AD carry that could be this carry threat. He was getting them wins. It hasn't even felt like they could really get him going. I know people are still kind of like hoping that they will, but they have looked so rough in a lot of these series. The teams have just really leveled up, it feels like, around them, and they have not been able to keep pace.
This really feels like you're watching an amateur team play against a pro team with Shopify's games. And, I think they are, not as high budget as some of these other teams. They have, players who maybe wouldn't go for the first round in the draft, stuff like that. But, yeah, normally our lower tier teams look a little bit more competitive than them so far. Maybe they'll get it together. They have a long break to do it. I think what's going to be really important for this long break is how disciplined teams can be during their practice. I think teams like Team Liquid, who are known for taking scrims really seriously, are going to benefit a lot from this, because you have so long to just scrim and whatnot. But if you just don't take your scrim seriously, if you just, perma limit test, you just throw for fun, then your time's going to be wasted and you're probably not going to get better at all.
I will say, the bright spot for me is actually not even Bvoy. It is Insanity. Insanity picked the Lucian and got the flash advantage, like did what he was supposed to do in this lane at the beginning of the game, and then it quickly became unplayable with losing the first blood for Maokai and Maokai getting counter jungled and pushed out and stuff. But we did get to see some of the positives that we referred to in the previous, season for Shopify for Insanity. Mm-hmm. So, there are like still those building blocks, but a ton of work does have to get done, in the long break that we do have coming up, and that's like the hope story for all these teams that are on the receiving end mm-hmm. of these big stomps. You're gonna have to put in a whole bunch of work. It's just really difficult though when you haven't won any games going into such a long break, because then team atmosphere is really hard to turn around at that point after so many losses.
Yeah, it is really, really rough, right? And we have a couple other teams that are, down towards the bottom of the standings, like Immortals, 100 Thieves, and so on. But they've at least, they have some wins. Dig has 3 game wins. Energy has 3 game wins. So everyone has some wins, except for Shopify. So they are alone down at the bottom. Cloud9 is now tied with TL. They're both same match score. They're 3-0, but they're both also 6-1 in games. And FlyQuest is a bit behind them in third at 5-3. FlyQuest looking really dominant against Dig, so it really is starting to feel like kind of that 3-horse race at the top. And it feels like, I think the middle of the pack teams that we're looking at, the 100 Thieves, the Energy, the Dignitoses, at least so far they haven't really been able to, I think, get to that next level to where they actually can compete with like a FlyQuest or a C9 or a TL. So it does feel like we kind of have broken up into like these different tiers pretty quickly, this split, and I'm really interested to see how much that's actually going to change after the break.
Yeah, I was actually really surprised about the Dig vs. Fly series today, because it kind of looked like Quad just got the better of Jensen in both the games. And, kind of add insult to injury, it was one of those situations where they played the same matchup but reversed. And Quad kind of came out ahead on both sides of the matchup, which is pretty rough.
Yeah.
I mean, that can happen sometimes, but when it's a grudge match, when you're against your former team that replaced you, you kind of don't like that to happen.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, there was a couple moments where it felt like I feel like it's rare to see kind of nerves from Jensen on stage, but there was a couple moments where I thought, oh, that looks like a little bit of nerves. Like when he TP'd back on Corki, or sorry, not on Corki, he was playing Tristana against the Corki in game 2. He had already had his Kraken Slayer done. He completes his tier 2 boots, and Quad was pushing the top lane tier 1. He TP'd in, and he just jumped in on him, and he canceled like 2 or 3 autos in a row when he was actually going in on him. And I'm like, I don't really ever see that from Jensen. Tristana is definitely not a champion that he's played a lot of. Like the actual pure kind of AD mids, he barely ever plays. This was 8th game in his entire career of Tristana mid, and Tristana mid has been meta for a long time. He barely plays a Lucian, so he's not usually on those sides. So I was thinking maybe on the Corki side he would be the kind of like the more comfortable, but it looked like Quad was doing just fine in both sides of the matchup.
I mean, another reason why a lot of people had hopes for Dig coming into this is that they had been doing well, right? They won a game versus Cloud9, which is one of the top tier teams. So you're listing out your
only loss they have.
Yeah, your early tiers. And then they had their wins versus 100 Thieves, and you started to get super hype. Like, oh my God, Sven is popping off specifically. So to me, one of the biggest surprising parts, even though the big story is Quad and Jensen in mid lane with the replacement, when they 2v3'd bottom.
Yeah.
Basu and Busio win the 2v3 on the Brand ganking them in the big minion wave. I was like, this is cooked. It's over. Wrap it up. Take us home, because this is the young FlyQuest bottom lane that they were like, oh yeah, we inspired of Bwipo have to do so much carrying and tell everyone what to do. And your bottom lane is 2v3ing. You lose so much pressure. As jungle, you're like, oh,
that was
great.
Game over.
It's
I mean, that was
completely cooked at that point.
That was so rough. I think Busio deserves a lot of credit.
Support gap was
because
insane this series.
it really
handshakes.
was. He has kind of gotten a decent amount of criticism in FlyQuest games, and he's had some shaky games, but today he was really good. He got Player of the Series as well, deservedly. And yeah, man, I don't know. When I was watching that game, that Brand gank, Leona missed the E. They're just getting 2v2'd. Brand comes up from behind. Like, I think he E'd Renatus, then he had nothing to stun Callista, and it was just dirty. It was really rough to watch.
Yeah. I mean, and they swapped away from the matchup because they were playing Kai'Sa Leona into Callista and Renata, which seemed like pretty unplayable. So I think the lane swap was smart. But then you're already going to be a little bit down because they got the 2 early plates, so they got a better first buy. They come back, they're winning the trades, and then they get 2v3'd, and it was just pretty much lights out after that. I also thought that Busio did a really good job playing the map afterwards. Like after they got the advantage, he didn't just sit around and do nothing in 2v2. He was actually just walking around the map with Inspired, and they were able to take like every objective, moving around together. I thought they played really well. So
yep.
they
got Jensen's flash too.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So Busio, I thought, played really, really well. The Poppy game also, obviously everyone kind of knows Mickey X and Mickey for Poppy, and like he's the one I think that in the West at least is kind of popularizing that. But it's cool to see Busio bringing that out and playing the kind of aggressive style.
I mean, MSI, it was permaban versus him, and everyone at MSI was talking about all the scrims. They're like, we can't even scrim them. We had to message them and ask them, please don't pick Poppy anymore, because we're getting bad scrim data because Mickey is just blasting everyone with Poppy support. And they're just like, can we just have a different draft here? And we're like, okay. So yeah, I mean, this week just really did cement like the top 3. The Team Liquid, FlyQuest, and Cloud9 holding hands at the top, the triumvirate, controlling the entire LCS, it seems like. But the games on Thursday were also quite interesting to me because they were also 2-0s, but they were
closer.
Exactly, a lot closer. 100 Thieves versus Team Liquid was still interesting to me because it actually required from Team Liquid Impact going God mode in the first game. River, I thought, would spam honors on River because he was the only one not dying and stayed focused and got them into a winnable position. The first game was his Brand game.
Yeah.
And he was
the lone hope.
He kept up his farm. He kept up his focus on the objectives, and then he actually won them some team fights. It's just that Impact's Giga Mordekaiser got so far ahead with the early kills and everything. Dude, Impact just ran the whole game.
That was so insane by Impact. He must have heard our GOAT discussion, and
it was awesome.
He had to give people some reminders because that was such a top lane 1v9 that entire game. Nobody's playing Mordekaiser. He just whips it out into the Skarner. just a basically permaban champion, and he just completely took over the game. Almost every single play was him just carrying, every team fight, every pick, even when he had that one little mistake where he gave away the 1K bounty, and then it looked like they were going to lose the game, but then he found that really sick play where he, recalled early, got into the line bush below mid, and then got the ult on Ezreal, killed him, and basically just got Liquid back in the game right there. So that was just such a masterclass.
Yeah, but my favorite part about this one was that in our sea of 2-0s, 100 Thieves actually were pushing Team Liquid, and everybody.
Stormy weather in that sea of 2-0.
There's some stormy weather, but we're looking for the lower teams to actually try and push the top teams, and especially Team Liquid, because even among the top tier, both Cloud9 and FlyQuest are kind of bowing to Team Liquid right now, as they're
beat FlyQuest this
all
season.
Our interviews that we did with both members of both teams, both Cloud9 and FlyQuest team members, admitted right now, yes, Team Liquid is definitive among the LCS teams, number one. And so it's kind of cool to see, especially because for me, 100 Thieves has now this reputation of they have the most creative drafts. They will pick so many different champions, namely because of Quid and River. They're so versatile. But I do look forward to their games and what they can actually accomplish in this long downtime, what stuff they can cook up for the comeback, because we're going to be several patches along now after the big break, after we do come back. So there's a little bit of hope there. And then the Energy Immortals one, I was just relieved for the Energy players' sake that they were able to get a dub before going into the break.
Interview your homies.
Dokla even tweeted out, "Thank God we got to get a win before the long break." You could tell that one was a big one for the team morale and stuff, and so I'm hoping that they'll have
Are you back on the train?
Like I said, I still predicted them to win that series. I'm eyeballing it, but still very scared of touching that.
He's watching the train.
Are you on the train, though?
I'm watching it. I'm not standing on it.
Okay.
What's actually crazy is I was just looking at game duration, because I was thinking we've had a lot of kind of one-sided, faster games and stuff. So at the top of the league, it's 31, under 32. TL is 31.49 average. The second lowest in the league is FlyQuest at 30.44. The lowest average game duration, Shopify, 27 minutes and 29 seconds.
They get it done quick.
They do get it done quick. I mean, that is rough. They're 3 to 4 minutes faster average game time than every other team in the league, and they haven't won a game yet. So that is rough. But there's another thing that was kind of sticking out to me this week is some of these champions that have still stayed really popular but haven't been doing well. We talked about Nidalee obviously and stuff, but Cassante, man, Cassante has just been chain losing, it feels like, in the LCS. It's the most picked. There's 15 games, has a 26% win rate. It's 4-11. It feels like this champion is just chain losing, perma useless every time. The only person that seems like they're winning on Maokai at all is everyone else feels like they're just not doing anything on Maokai. They can't make ganks happen, and they're just farming more slowly than the other AP junglers. So that's looking kind of useless too. And it has been interesting that those are more the old style of champions that people were playing last split, and it feels like people are kind of just defaulting to it because of comfort, but it doesn't feel like they're having much, if any, success on them.
I think that at least the Cassante one is user error. I just watched Genji and Kinsante.
Genji is so fake though. Genji can play anything and win, man. Yeah. It's Genji is fake data. That's I don't know. Those shoes, looks like those are pretty good shoes. Usain Bolt just ran pretty fast in those, Yeah,
I do still think Cassante is is pretty fine for pro play though.
Yeah, it's not doing very well in LCS.
Yeah.
My hot take about Cassante is I think he's actually hard to play, and I think that there is a lot of gameplay when it comes to playing against him. I don't think he's just a face roll champ. He kind of has that Zoe effect where, because it can feel so unfair playing against him, when Cassante just pulls you across the map and stuns you 3 times and one-shots you, you're like, wow, this champion's cool. But to actually do that, it's not as free as it might seem. So I think, I'm not 100% sure on how strong he is right now. He has gotten nerfed a lot. But yeah, I don't know. I think, maybe people are picking him when they're not as
his
proficient
win
as
rate,
they think.
his win rate even globally in pro has gone down a lot. I mean, in spring he was just like nonstop played in every league and everywhere. Had over 1,500 games of it in pro play in spring with a 53% win rate, which is pretty crazy. In summer, even globally, it's at a 44% win rate. So it's gone down like 9%, which is very significant. And in some of the top leagues is doing like, just about as bad, right? There are obviously the exceptions. There's players who are, really, really good on this champion that are still having a lot of success, but it does feel like it's a lot weaker than it was. And it's actually getting abused in some of these matchups. Like I felt bad for Licorice watching him play against TF when he was playing the Cassante game. It's like, what are you supposed to do against this Ghost Flash TF who's running you down through your whole lane? He pops Ghost and tries to run away. He can't get away. He tries to turn. Can't really turn because he's losing the fight. Then the Ghost expires. He finally looks like he's getting away. He gets ulted on. Like
I don't feel bad for him for some reason. No.
Dude, that's just top lane in a nutshell, though. It's people are picking Cassante because what do you blind pick when you're top lane, right?
Yeah.
You want to pick something that is somewhat stable. People go to Renekton sometimes, but there are just so many counter picks up there.
Renekton feels better to me right now.
Yeah. I mean, I've always kind of liked Renekton, even though he kind of gets a lot of hate from the community because there are those games where people just look completely useless on him. But it's tough, man. I mean, what do you blind pick when you're going top? There's so many things that just have these completely unplayable matchups. So it's kind of like, pick your poison, man. We're getting counter picks somewhere else. Good luck.
This is kind of a fun like little preview tease because we do have a champion designer coming on later too, so we can ask Lexi directly about these types of things, especially because Aurora, even though she's like said to be a mid laner now, can't always control that, and definitely looks like Aurora has some good tools for being played in the top lane. So we'll also talk to her about it.
I mean, it definitely sounded like it was top lane pick. You were saying that you thought it seemed like a top lane pick. I talked to Licorice. He was like, yeah, this thing is the top lane pick. Like, I'm going to be playing it. So it'll be interesting to get that take. But League of ADCs, also something that's been kind of a big topic recently, as we've been seeing so many ADs across like all roles in pro. We're seeing 4 to 5 a game, it feels like. Basically every game is like Tristana Corki in mid lane. We're seeing lots of ADTF top, and we're obviously having ADs, all kinds of ADs played bot lane. So it is like kind of at that point where I feel like even just community-wise, people are starting to complain about it. Like why are ADCs so strong? Why is Tristana allowed to be played mid still? Why is like this Emacs Corki thing like dominating? And there is kind of that feeling of frustration around it. Because we don't see it in pro as much, but still things like Quinn and Vayne and whatnot can terrorize solo queue as well. So there's so many picks that are really strong right now.
I was even trying to watch Meteos' co-stream, and there were 2 AD carries in there with him. They're everywhere.
So many AD carries. I mean, I definitely have a lot of back and forth with Sneaky Dola about this, about AD carries, and it's tough. I mean, what do you do? How do you, if you're the balancer for the game, how do you make AD carries playable bot so they feel good, but not also just, super strong in solo lanes because you get so much more gold, XP. With the case of Tristana and Corki, just the fact that you're playing something that scales, that's ungankable, makes it so appealing. On top of the AP jungler who's playing really good, which, you want to pair an AD mid with that. Mm-hmm. So it's, I don't know. I mean, for now it looks like it's here to stay, but I would like to see the meta shake up. I think right now it's super hard for the lower tier teams to win with these kind of drafts because so many of these drafts just, they don't feel super explosive. It's just kind of like you have these stable matchups and the team that's winning is just able to keep pressing their lead and they're, fairly safe and they scale really well. So it's just, doesn't really lend itself well to comebacks.
Yeah, I mean, people are just taking over the map. Like slight advantages become bigger and bigger and bigger. Like you say, it's less explosive, so there's like less, maybe an individual outplay or things that you can kind of make happen to turn the game around. One thing I will say that in my understanding of one of the ways that people will try to push a champion more towards a duo lane and away from solo lanes is taking more power out of XP. So it's like the scaling of level ups and stuff becomes like less important and more of the power is in like, just gold, basically, right? Like you're more reliant on the items and less on like the level scaling. So it's like maybe there needs to be something like that is, changes to the way that they're scaling or the way that their stats are working as they're leveling up or something, to try to like pull them out of mid lane a bit more. Another thing that people often talk about targeting is just wave clear, right? And wave clear obviously is really, really important as soul lanes. And it's not that it's not important in bot lane, but I think it's like less important comparatively. So I don't know. There's definitely things that they could try to target, but it can be difficult, right? And it's also one of those things that, especially in pro, when you have these champions that are really safe and scale really well, it's so hard to actually abuse them, right? They don't get picked on the same way that they do necessarily in solo queue. But even in solo queue now, Tristana, like I've been playing Tristana mid for years and years because it's one of the champions I like to play. But in solo queue, it didn't always have a super high win rate. Now it's been like, it's a really high win rate even in solo queue. So this pick probably could just get nerfed, period.
The thing that gets me when I watch the Corki and Tristana specifically is that for whatever reason, they can rush the tank boots, either Tabby or Merchant, depending on their matchup.
I feel like only Corki can, really.
Well, I mean, we saw Quad do it today.
Did he on Trist?
Yeah.
Oh.
We've seen it on both. Even Ezreal mid, I think when Quid was playing it, rushed Merc Treads. And to me, I'm like, this is such like, weird gameplay. It's just, it's too safe. It shouldn't be a thing.
And these are problems that I've been pretty vocal about as far as some of the systems changes that they've done for a long time for League, which is you keep seeing every few patches them trying to combat snowballing, and in some of the ways that they're doing this is reducing the value of getting kills and promoting the value of minions and like tower plates and towers and stuff like this. So that pushes the game holistically more towards like these PvE aspects and takes away some of the reward for being risky and going for kills, which to me is more interesting, more exciting, like gameplay to watch. So at least for competitive, for viewers' sake, I actually always get a little bit sad when I see patch notes and they're talking about trying to combat some of these things, at least when they go about it in the way of the recent ones I'm remembering are they reduced the experience that you get when sharing experience on kills later. When they were doing the jungle changes, they both buffed up your experience from camps because they're like, all right, we want them to farm more. And then if you reduce the value too much on going for kills on people, then everyone's just going to value farm. And so if you're going to value farm, then you're going to value rushing some steel caps because then you can't get killed while you farm. Yeah. And then the other person's like, all right, well, I can't kill him while I farm. Well, he farms, so I also got to make it so he can't kill me while I farm, and then everyone's just farming, and we're going to end up in super PvE, type mode. I'm not saying, it's exploded and we've got to that situation.
Mostly Corki.
It's just that
Corki, every game is tier, tabbies, and a D-blade, if not a cull.
Yeah, it's just that when I see these types of changes, that's what I start to think about, and that's what I start to worry about.
Yeah, it's interesting. I didn't even notice that Quid on the Trist game actually rushed tabbies as well. Because generally,
quad.
Quad. Yeah. Generally, the Trist player rushes straight towards Kraken. But I know Quad also in that game did Bork Rush, which is also like pretty atypical. So he was, I guess, going for a little bit of a different build.
Did you guys have any more thoughts on the Thursday series
we could jump ahead. We're ready to bring in Lexi.
All right.
Well, we're going to take a quick break, but once we get back, we're going to be talking about Aurora with Riot Lexical from the Champions team.
Hello?
Bro, why are you parking?
Seriously, what is that?
Remote smart parking assist. You could have parked anywhere.
They could have parked there. They could have parked there. They could have parked there.
And we are back with Riot Lexical. Thank you for joining us, the product lead for the Champions team. Welcome to the dive.
Hi.
I know.
So
you're
happy to be here.
starstruck. I know. We're big idols, of course. Do you want to explain to the viewers a little bit about maybe what you do exactly?
Yeah, for sure. I'm the product lead for Champions team. Generally, my role encompasses kind of the initiation, figuring out kind of the roadmap for League of Legends on what champions that we want to rework, what champions we're going to be making, and also kind of bring in the design, narrative, and art, which will what we call the DNA of a champion, together to really work together so that they kind of bring together the initiation of a champion. I also kind of oversees the development process from start to the end, including working really closely with folks in publishing and to kind of really figure out what the experience that our players receive them look like and feel like.
I guess I'll start it off then with what was the main goal of the space that you want to fill with this newest champion, Aurora? Because the community reactions after seeing the videos are all surrounding how mobile this champ is. That definitely gets people a little bit nervous, especially solo lane players.
Yeah, to be honest, Aurora, under the codename Lilibelle, has actually been around for a very, very long time. We actually attempted to make her several times previously, and I think there's like this cool dev doodle about Silas, which actually talks about her and one of her earlier attempts. And the dev team honestly really loved her from the beginning, and they kept coming to me and being like, hey, time to bring her back. And we did try to bring her back in various different ways. She inspired other champions like Lilia as well. And I think it's honestly the passion from the dev team that really moved me. And it just so happened that because we have a lot of more serious champions that are upcoming, we thought this was a good moment, especially for the summer beat, for Animal
right.
Squad, to do something a little bit more lighthearted. And she's just so happened to fit in there perfectly.
So what is it about, this version of the champion that maybe worked out that some of the others didn't, right? Because you said you guys have been trying to do it for a long time. You've been wanting to make this style of champion, or this champion in particular. Like, what is it that you think didn't work out in the past that maybe is working out now?
Yeah, and this is something I think we struggled a little bit in the earlier stages of our development, which is we wanted her to kind of be our take on a top lane mage. What ended up actually working for us is taking that explicit goal away, and because we found it like a little bit too annoying and the patterns aren't as healthy as we actually wanted her to be, and thus we ended up going like, you know what, she's a fantastic champion on her own. She doesn't need to be locked to the top lane. Let's find a spot for her that feels healthy and intuitive for our players. So instead we actually tune her a lot towards the mid lane, and we'll probably be balancing her towards that as well, and also watching out for kind of those unhealthy patterns. I think when it comes to Silas, it was honestly that time around, it's not like that she didn't work. I think one of the earlier iterations had like more of a like summoner style play, but we found that really unsatisfying because it also feels like you're not actively engaging. Instead, the particular summon that you had was the one that's engaging in the team play or the power, the different fun part of League of Legends, and when it comes to the Silas attempt, we actually just found a kit that was really, really cool, and it just felt really, really bad when this like champion that's so cute and happy keeps slamming you with your own spells, and we just felt like it didn't fit her character. So that time around we're like, but it's still such a fun kit.
Oh, so she was literally gonna have Silas's kit.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And we're like, you know what? The kit is fun enough. We should just pivot towards the kit.
Design that fits the kit.
Exactly. And
Need a more edgy, buff, angry dude.
yeah.
More chains.
He can Malphite ult me, but I don't want a bunny girl Malphite ulting me.
Yeah, and so that was like that attempt. So there's like
Yeah.
several different reasons why we pivoted it away. Yeah.
What is it that you think is actually going to push us towards mid lane? Because it's interesting. Meteos obviously got to come do some playtests and a lot of the other pros, and we talked to Meteos about it. I talked to Liquor Licorice and some of the other guys who tested it, everyone is like, this is a top laner. This is going to be played top lane. I'm going to play it top lane. It's going to be horrible for melee champions to lane against. That's what everyone has tried has told me. So what is it that you think is pushing it more towards mid lane, or what will push it more towards mid lane and keep it from becoming that kind of problem spot in top lane? Because everyone that I've talked to is talking about it like, this is an AP vein that you have to lane against, or this is back when Lilia first came out and people were playing it into a lot of melee matchups in top and stuff. Like, it's that sort of style where it has sustain, it has range, it has disengage and dashes that really make melee champions struggle, and it has stacking move speed as well with like the spirits that you can pull and stuff. So it like has all these tools that feel like it is uniquely qualified to screw over melee champions in the top lane.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things, and we actually tested a more extreme version of this during like earlier development, which was she has less sustained damage and more of like burst style play style. So it's more about her targeting squishies and being able to like delete them when she get access to them. And it's actually pretty hard for her to get access because of her short range, right? So she's looking for the right ways to gain access. Since then, like, I think sometimes we like to like go extremes first to kind of see the outcomes before we somewhat settle among the middle. I don't necessarily think her current version will keep her from being in the top lane, but we're expecting her to be more dominant in the mid lane. And if we do see it tilting towards one way or another, and this is something that we'll work on like when she goes live, we will try to, figure out if it is actually okay and the patterns are healthy and not healthy. If it is not, if it is causing a lot of frustration, then we definitely have vectors that can then tune her more so to where we were before, where she's a bit more bursty. I think that's the main thing, because when we were discussing specifically about like how easy is it to lock a champion away from solo laning, it becomes like a very slippery hill very quickly, mostly because right now I think in the state of game there isn't really like a place where like you have to be the mid laner and where you have to be the top laner. We have consistently seen like mid lane mages going to support roles or top lane champions going to the mid lane, so there is that sense of like, hey, there isn't going to be a complete lockdown unless we do something that is, I personally think, a little bit unfortunate and nasty, to just hard lock a champion into a specific lane. So we have tactics. We don't know which one we want to use, and I think this is something that we're willing to like kind of watch and see and look at our data and see our player opinions and tune for it. And yeah.
I like that at the very least you said it used to be more annoying in top lane. And so whatever release version we get will at least be a step down from whatever it used to be. And even if some of the like pros and people were saying it's still very good in top lane and very annoying, I heard that you had like an hour plus long conversation with Bwipo after their pro playtest. Can you give us like the cut down version?
Oh my goodness.
Any highlights from your Bwipo conversation?
Yeah, it's funny because I talked to the designer and I was like taking so much notes the whole entire time. I kind of blew up our Slack channel because I was like, session 1, this is
an hour of Bwipo.
Yeah. And then session 2, these are all the things that was said. It's funny that like at first the two different playtest pods actually has slightly different opinions. I know the morning ones is like, she's extremely broken. There's like must pick and blind pickable, etc.
Were you in the first one or the second one?
Both.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And then the second one, like someone was like, oh, I think she's a for fun champion. Like I don't know if anyone will pick her up. So there's already that discrepancy, but to be quite honest, that was a very, I would say, broken version, because when I was talking to the designer after the fact, he was like, oh gosh, if I really knew this was coming, maybe like I would have not like done what I did. But it was also really fun because they actually showcased a really fun version of her that was slightly broken, and we got some awesome clips for it as well.
It is a new champion that's kind of the bill for I'm kind of curious on that front, where there's a lot of memes and opinions people have of like release date diff with new champs just always being overpowered. Is that something that the being on the champion teams that some of you think about? Is it like we release this champ intentionally on the strong side to make it more appealing, show up more in games, or is that just like it happens?
I think it sometimes is a little bit of both. We don't intentionally be like, oh, it has to be broken the moment it comes out. We do usually have like a set mind target of like what it should be before it comes out. But our players tend to surprise us, and this is something that I think I want to kind of instill in the team is like, just because it isn't to our expectation, that's okay, because the state of the game is constantly changing, right? When we're developing this champion for like 9 to 12 months, we don't necessarily know the exact outcome when she releases or when any champion releases what the state of game is actually going to be, because we balance every 2 weeks, and so league is in constant flux. But what I have consistently noticed is that when champions do come, let's say on the power, there's 2 things that could happen. One is that players don't really know how to play at first, so that process of getting used to the champion and learning the champion is very disheartening. And so when champions do come a little bit overpowered, they really help that learning curve slightly. Just as our general player players learn how to play the champion.
It was when Smolder came out, Doran, people were going D-Blade, and it was like a 4 or 5%, maybe even 6% lower win rate than starting Doran's Ring, as an example.
Yeah, and that's I think maybe our items, if I remember correctly, our item systems, item recommender, were also made a mistake there. So we knew it wasn't the most optimal build, but because we recommended it accidentally to everyone, yeah, and it just ended up
right, devs are just Klein and LP going Doran's
classic freak.
and so yeah, we ended up actually changing it just to, and then we'll start seeing a climb and win rate, right? Because in that early stages, I think it's actually really, really fun. Everyone's doing theory crafting and trying to find out what is right and what is wrong and what is OP and what isn't. So that phase is something I think is actually really sacred. On the other side, where Briar, someone that we know is really, really hard to get into. Honestly, I think the first time I play tested it, I went 0-10, and August was just shaking his head behind me. It was why, what are you doing, right? Briar released with such low win rate that people are this champion is unplayable. And we knew at that moment, it's actually, I think she might be kind of broken, because her win rate goes up by 5 to 10% every single day. And that tells us, oh, it's going to settle somewhere that's actually really higher. So yeah, with these things, it's you kind of have to adapt, and that's kind of beauty of League of Legends. We have live devs that will be there and support the game every single patch.
I think one of the things that's interesting, I was on playtest team in the past and did some embeds with live gameplay and some balancing stuff. And one of the things I think people sometimes forget and don't really think about is that it's you can be playtesting this champion internally for a year plus, and within an hour of it being on live, there's 1,000 times more data than you got in that full year, right? Because there's millions and millions of people playing in every region. And so it can be sometimes hard to know exactly how something is going to release, right? You maybe the best player on the team, or best player on the playtest team, is really specifically good at this type of champion and is making it look stronger than it otherwise would be. Or maybe you don't have someone that's really good at this style of champion, so it feels weaker than it would be, right? And things like that. And it's really hard to account for everything, because there's so many millions of people that play the game that it's the amount that you learn in the first hour after release is just so much more than you can ever learn internally about how a champion is going to be played.
Yeah, I remember a really similar thing is even going from PBE to live is a super huge jump.
Yep.
I remember when Mythic items were first coming out, that was one of the only times I've really spent a good amount of time on the PBE. And I was I'm going to get so ahead of everyone. I'm going to already know everything when it comes out and be so smart. And then it came out and nothing I thought was true ended up being true. And I was well, that was kind of a bait. So
you were
I imagine
silver players on PvE and
yeah. I mean, it's PvE games or something. But it's interesting too when you talk about win rate data and stuff. Is Mort Dog works on TFT, but he has a lot of insight into design, and he talks about how a lot of people like using statistics and numbers and whatnot, win rates. But when you're making the thing, you don't have any of that, right? It's you don't have millions of people playing millions of games a day. So you kind of just have to go off, intuition and whatever
Numbers.
else. Yeah.
Comparing champion to champion.
How do you think about, when you're designing something? So like one of the things that's always interesting is when you're talking about pro play versus like, normal play or whatever. I know that we have the different brackets like average, skilled, elite, pro, or whatever it is. I don't remember all the brackets.
I think you got it.
But it's like the idea that when you're designing a more complex champion, it's going to just inherently have this weighted imbalance, right? Because it's like when you look at a champion like Azael that's historically had those issues in pro, where when you play this champion at an extremely high level, it's so strong and it can kind of do everything if you can play it like perfectly, right? But the average player plays it and it's trash, right? It doesn't, because you're not in the right position, you're not able to find these angles that pro players are, right? So when you're designing a more complex champion, like I would think you're having to worry more about that. So like how do people take that into consideration? Because like immediately when I think of Aurora, I think of, okay, this is a champion that has a lot of mobility. It seems like there's a fair bit of complexity. You have like the hop backwards thing, you have the invisibility, you have the ulti where you can jump to a different side to side. I'm immediately like, a pro is just going to be way better at this than your average player. So, like, is that something that you guys think about or account for? And like, how do you try to decide like how complex is too complex, right? When thinking about pro play versus average play?
We definitely made our mistakes in the past, and what we try to do generally is to learn from those as in the best way we can, right? After the fact, and this is actually why till this day, Champs team will try at least make sure the champion is in a healthy day state for 11 weeks after release before handing it off to our balance partners, mostly because we don't want to just like throw a problem child into their lap and be like, done.
Name some of the problem children. We all know them.
Yeah, exactly. And those actually stay on the team for a lot longer than 11 weeks because we do recognize them as problems, right? Personally, the way I look at it is actually in the sense of burden. And what I worry about is not actually the amount of complexity it is on the people who play the champion, because there's going to be different skill level and it's going to be for different segment of our player base. What I need to worry more so about is that how much burden it is to play against and playing with the champion. And this is something that I think I also learned a little bit from Smolder as well. Some of the early win rates for Smolder in solo queue was actually pretty low, but when it comes to team play, it actually gets a little bit better, and where organized play, it gets a little better. And one part of it was actually because like supports are like don't really know how to play against someone who is like stacking and
insta lock that blitzcrank. All right, it's great.
Yeah, and or like, hey, I'm gonna lock in Zyra and take all your farming, right? Like even though you get your power.
I think we report though.
Yeah, that's a report for sure.
Exactly.
I guess this is one of the 80 carries that doesn't work when I steal all the farm.
It's crazy. It doesn't work when you take Spino support and steal all the cannons.
Yeah, and when it comes to like when we were actually, this is something that we explicitly talked about when it comes to Hui. Because when it comes to Hui, we're like, this is going to be a complex champion. It's going to be a love letter for the folks that really, really want that complexity. But let's not make some of the similar problems that we did with Aphelios, where when you're playing against or playing with, you don't technically know what his gun does, and it's really hard for you to figure that out, which is why we made his ability actually really, really easy to, while I may not know what this big red thing is going to do that's falling out of the sky that looks like a lightning bolt, I know to get out of the way. And I know when he's actually going to do it. And at least this is how I've been thinking about this, because I still think it's very important to support kind of all sectors of our player base, whether that means a really complex champion or a really easy champion. But there's also champions that happen to hit both end of the spectrum, right? On one side, it is like, hey, this is actually a really easy champion to get into and actually really, really hard to master, but I still have a lot of fun. And Yao Su is one of those examples that we bring up all the time, is like, yes, we know 0-10 power spike is a meme, and it's a meme for a good reason. It's because he's actually highly complex to play or to get right. But it is so easy to know how to have fun with him, right? Like if I hit my Q and
everywhere and
exactly. And so that is okay. Like if you don't find successes, that's fine.
Okay if it's on the other team.
That that is your personal choice of what champions that you're picking.
I will be banning it.
But at least if the players that are low skill cap are having fun with the champion and enjoying the champion, maybe it is okay.
Yeah.
So I want to ask a question for like our viewers at home, because majority of our viewers are not pro players. This is not, and this is a very complex champion that's going to be coming out. If you're just going to give them some early tips because they really care about abusing things as early as possible to get, like free wins and
Kobe's talking about himself.
And gain elo. Yeah, these nebulous people, these viewers. What are your tips for like the best ways on release to try and use Aurora?
The way I look at Aurora is actually she's very reminiscent of like your Ari. Like you can play her very utility style where you're getting, a lot of benefits from various different things. Or it could be very, very simple, right? Like I have tools to get me out of bad situations, and I have tools that if I identify the right moment and want to go in and burst someone down, I can do that. So I think a lot of the standard League of Legends tip apply, and the rest is just about thinking about the game in terms of like the damage I do and when is good time to engage and run away.
Something I want to touch on that you were talking about is the idea of like the experience of playing against versus playing as and whatnot, and playing with, as you also said, because like I got to try a lot of champions that were in development when I was on playtest, and sometimes you would have a champion that would be super 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 fun to play, but it's a horrible experience to play against. So like how is that something that you guys are actually weighing for and judging for, right? Because there's something that we used to call just kind of like single player design, where it would be like in a single player game it doesn't matter if the computer is having fun, right? Like you can create something that's incredibly overpowered and like does all these wild things, but it doesn't matter because you're not playing against someone else. Whereas like something like an example of this where I felt it went too far was like Zeri, right? Zeri, it felt like if the player is skilled enough, it is all on them to make the mistake rather than their opponents to capitalize on, right? Because you're giving something that has like incredible amounts of range and move speed. So when you would watch a regular player play it, it doesn't look that crazy, but then you watch a pro player play it and it's like you can't catch them, you can't stop them, you can't do anything. So it's like how much do you guys kind of weigh the playing for versus playing as, or playing for versus playing like against type of experience, and like how do you kind of take that in consideration when it's like maybe you have an idea that's really fun but maybe it's not gonna be fun to play against?
Yeah, as pretty much as we do other facet, which is like play test a lot, look at the feedback, take the feedback seriously, discuss it with the team and figure out like what is the best approach, and also learn from kind of our past and digest our past. And sometimes our theories may or may not be correct, but we can do something and figure it out. And in the worst case scenario, we can also like utilize some of our other tools like changing it and mid-scoping it later on. And specifically when it comes to like frustration of playing against, I think one thing that we talk a lot about is actually giving the champion distinct weaknesses that they might be good in some situations but not so much in the other. And Aurora's specific case is like her range is going to be her biggest weakness, her lack of CC is going to be her biggest weakness, even though some champions that are kind of like her, like Lilia and Ari and Nico, actually do have these I would say harder ways to stop a person from engaging, as well as wanting to engage on someone.
One quick thing I want to touch on, then Meteos, it looks like you want to jump in. When you're talking about range being a major weakness, are you not concerned that like almost feels like it's pushing you out of mid lane? Because it feels like traditionally when you think about mid lane, you think about long range control mages that you're playing against, right? So if your range is supposed to be your weakness, how is this supposed to match up well against like Hui and Orianna and Corki and Tristana and like all these champions that you traditionally see there?
Yeah, it is definitely a good question, and it's something that we also like kind of considered and talked a little bit more about, especially after that playtest. And I think Meteos actually exactly said that point. And when we were discussing it, again, we are okay with her having a player base in both solo lanes, and she is going to be distinctly better against some melee champions versus others. I would say more so on the squishier side, and we also do see a lot of those champions being played in the mid lane, which is why we're like, hey, this could happen. These are like the couple different scenarios that could potentially happen. The other side that we're looking at is definitely like that lever of tuning her towards being more bursty, that will help if we ever need to kind of bring it back as well.
Cool.
Interesting. Yeah, so the question I had that I didn't actually think about this during the playtest, but I was thinking about it afterwards was when you're making one of these new champions, like how do you decide if it's going to be AP or an AD champion? Because one thing with Aurora that I didn't really consider till afterwards was a lot of times, especially when you're drafting a team comp, it can be hard to draft an AP champion who has like no CC on their kit, right? Because with most team comps, you want to have like enough crowd control to, be able to lock the other team down. But if you over-index in that, then they all get merc treads, and it's not a good time. So with Aurora, who doesn't really have any hard CC, like what was the reason behind making her an AP champion instead of like an AD one?
So there are a couple of different things that when we decide, sometimes we decide very explicitly upfront if a champion should be AP versus AD. In those cases, a lot of times what we're considering is like the roadmap, because I generally want to have a fairly balanced roadmap like around year to year, so that there are different kind of needs that we're serving every once in a while, and different player base that we're also serving. In terms of other champions that we don't explicitly decide that, what we end up doing is just like, hey, where does it make sense? With Aurora, kind of her play style, as well as kind of the audience we're going after, which is the Aries, the Nikos, and the Lilias, it just made a lot more sense for her to be AP, because we do anticipate that is like essentially the audience that will like gravitate toward her and play her and pick her up right away. And honestly, I think that's one of the things that we didn't do as well when it comes to Gwen, is that like the player base that want to play Gwen versus the player base that actually plays Gwen are actually very, very different. And I feel like that's kind of a lost opportunity, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. Is there... Yeah, I guess the flip side of it, I guess, would be with Gwen, right? It's like, say I like playing the Ari, the Nico, the Lilia, but I'm in a game where my whole team locks in AP, right? And it's like, I want to play one of my like cute bunny girls, but I need some AD.
Yeah.
You're just locking the bunny girl.
Yeah, like, maybe having the other option wouldn't be so bad.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely the case. And actually, Neferi is one of those cases where, like, we're explicitly calling out very early is like, hey, this is for, like, we don't really have a lot of monster players in the mid lane, so why don't we create one? Because it is also almost a chicken and egg problem. Is like we have trained all of our monster lover players to become jungle players over time, and like the ones who doesn't like to jungle will then leave our game. The ones that don't like to jungle and still likes monster players might just leave the game, and not, or alternatively, we only have taught them how to jungle this far around, so they're never going to invest into other lanes, right? So there are champions that we also have that explicit goal as well. Well, from what I've seen, it's actually pretty hard to convert people, but we still want to try it to make sure that our roster overall, like even though we have like 669 champions, we want it to feel balanced, so that like there is at least that one option for you, and that's something that like we're working on over time. But yeah, like I think Seraphine might be another one of those examples. We actually created her to be very much like a mage, right? If you think about the patterns of her abilities, that very much like Lux, except the players that gravitated to who she is and who liked her are Sona players, and they want to play her as a support or in the bot lane. And so there is that, like, we've seen that struggle with our players, like, hey, these players who really, really want it in their lane, and there's also these players who were like hypothetically thinking like, hey, that we could be bringing in through her. It is a balance and a trade-off, and it's something that we're like always assessing at different situations. And in the Fury's case, we're like, okay, well, now that she's solidified her position in the mid lane, maybe it's time to like kind of loosen our grip a little bit, and allowing her to jungle.
I like
monster lovers.
I like. Yeah, I was gonna say. As soon as she said that, I was like, "It's true. We're all monsters." All jungle players.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because for me, especially coming from like a pro player background, is
famous for playing Zac and Elise.
Well, okay, I like playing monster champs, but I don't go into the game thinking like, oh, let me scroll down my list, monsters. Like I just kind of like, for me, it's always gameplay first, and then their aesthetics and whatever afterwards. But it's interesting that, League is such a, widely played game. There's all kinds of different players. And I feel like the looks do matter to a lot of people. There's people who will like literally not play a champion because they're like, oh, it's ugly, I don't want it. And like that's valid too, right? So it's definitely something that you have to consider.
So we've obviously talked a lot about kind of like the specifics in gameplay, to talk a little bit about the other side of it. You said you're kind of managing, the full package of the champion. So like what the champion's personality is going to be, what their gameplay is going to be. You talked about how, the kit before didn't fit for who Aurora was as a champion. So do you want to talk a little bit about like why this kit fits her personality and like, who Aurora is and kind of like how that is a cohesive package maybe?
Yeah, I think the team that was working together on Aurora has been discussing her, loving her, and talking about her for like, oh my goodness, since like 2017. So this time around, they had like almost the exact thought of what she's going to be. But I was like, hey, that's a lot of baggage. Let's pack that back together, put that aside for now, and still make sure we do the due diligence of like looking in deeper and looking in different directions and exploring different directions. And actually you guys can see from like some of the concept art, and unfortunately we don't really show the narrative side and all the exploration they did on that front. We do a lot of research and piecing things together and being like, hey, does that work? Does that fit our goals? Does that fit our needs? Does that feel true to who she is? But at the end of the day, after we even did all that exploration, we were like, you know what, the version of her that this group of devs who are really, really passionate about her for all these years just works so well together, and it's just so iconic that we just have to go for it. And that is okay, right? That is different than some of the other champions that we do release, but that is okay. It's still going to be a fantastic champion. And on the other research side, we also worked with a lot of different partners, right? We know that Aurora is autistic, and we did a lot of searching and researching and working with consultants to make sure that we hit all of those notes correctly, and to bring that side of her so that people who want to play her feel like that she's really truly authentic to herself. And I think it's not completely a science either. It's a little bit of an art form at the point where we know exactly what she is like. So discovery and ideation are the two first phases. Discovery is very wide. Ideation is like we kind of know what we're doing, but not yet. And by pre-production, we're locked in on what we're doing. During those times and periods during like the time before we lock her to the point that we haven't, that's when like a lot of the magic happens, where like a designer will be like, well, if you are thinking her personality is like this, what would she do? What would be some of the things that she does that translates into her ability? And this is why there's a lot of the hopping and the jumping and the portals. And art will be like, well, if she's doing that, like how does her magic look, right? Let's go deep and explore what that magic look like, and when narrative comes back and they riff off of that, is like, well, her magic comes from the failures, and then the artist will be then like, well, then what does that look like? Is it close to the Avarosans, but has she ever interacted with the Avarosans? If not, then what is her magic system? So we go really deep and we kind of riff off of each other, and that's why we call that phase like the DNA, where design, narrative, and art really figure out the DNA of the champion.
How important is it to kind of like have everything be cohesive as far as like the personality and like how it all interconnects? Because you talked about how Aurora is autistic, and I know I was reading that like one of the things was for a lot of people with autism that can have sensory overload. So like that was supposed to be the whole thing of like her going into like the spirit realm or going invisible or whatever was supposed to be connected to her personality in that way, as like that was her kind of escape, right?
It's super, super important, and that's why we there's so much behind the scene work that sometimes we show players, sometimes we're like, hey, another time is better for this story to be told. In Aurora's specific case, we even go as deep as like, what is the material of her sweater made of? Is that okay? Some of her earlier weapon choices, we were talking about potentially giving her good ways to stim, and while we know that Aurora is not going to represent everyone, because that's just impossible, we want to make sure that at least the folks that do understand gets a seat on the table and be able to directly voice their opinions and thoughts, as well as going really, really deep and just figuring out kind of like how to do it correctly and how to represent it authentically.
Yeah, no, I think it is really cool because I'm very much on the side of like what Meteos says, where like I identify with gameplay first, and then maybe I connect to the looks and like the personality or the lore or whatever of champion second. But I do think, especially in a game that has 160 something champions, like it is cool that there is a champion for everyone and that like everyone can identify with. So I do like that you guys are trying to have it as more than just like a surface level thing of just saying like, oh, this champion is this way or this person has this personality, but having it actually like connect with how the champion plays and acts, I think is really cool.
Yeah, I mean, we are all on the super try hard, like I was talking about, focus on win rate. How do I get wins? How do I get LP first? That type of thing. But I have really become appreciative of like other connections with champions. Like I've played League since the very beginning, since beta, and I never was like really focused on one champ until the last couple of years, and I got super focused on like I actually became a volley bear one trick and got actually read the lore for once on a champion and actually like really started to get into the story, and I was like, oh my god, I have Viking heritage too, like this works perfectly, and I was like, I got even more into it and like played it even more, and so I love that there are all these other types of connections like you're talking about that people can have with champions. One of my good friends' son is autistic, and his special interest is in the planets and the solar system, and so he always has all these stats and like fun facts and stuff around this. And so I thought it was cool, seeing Aurora with the special interest in the spirit animals. And so I'm super excited to play test this champion on live when it comes out and see if it is actually broken, if it can jungle. Jungling always depends on like especially like ability cooldowns. I'm assuming since you guys don't want it to be a jungler, the cooldowns are too long to do it, but I'll always give it a shot.
I mean, modern day jungling is like whatever crazy modifier they slap onto that
True.
champion. Like Zyra, it's like her plants are going to just one-shot the whole jungle this patch. Have fun.
We definitely had a conversation about Aurora's jungle ability, and when she first went on PBE, it was a little too strong. And but in terms of like representing the champion, the like representation, the other fun things that we are able to do when it comes to Runeterra and our IP, because there are so many different types of players that we want to consider and want to make a champion for, is the fact that like Runeterra is just like potentially a better place, right? And so it is. This is why like kind of autism as a diagnosis is actually not on Runeterra, and why Aurora can grow up to be so like apologetically herself. And even if you're not autistic, you can still see parts of her that are just so aspirational, just like, hey, be yourself, be authentic to who you are, and it's okay. And I think that's kind of magical.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on and spending the time to talk about Aurora and talk about design. I know we were kind of grilling you, but definitely appreciate it. And I'm sure the fans will appreciate getting some more insight on it. So again, Riot Lexical, thank you so much. That'll wrap it up for this episode of The Dive, driven by Kia. And remember, if you're watching us on YouTube, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss an episode of The Dive. You can also check us out on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or any podcast platform. Make sure you send in more questions. We're going to be doing some episodes during the off weeks for LCS. So send in those questions on Twitter. Use the hashtag TheDiveLOL. The LCS will not be back until July 20th for week 4, but we're going to have more episodes of The Dive weekly. Until then, we'll see you.